Welcome back to The Doctor Is In with Dr. Nadia Saba. I'm Dennis Wadan, Dr. Saba's producer. For today's episode, the doctor will be in the lecture hall. Recently, Dr. Greenhouse attended the University of Arizona's CEAC short course and got the chance to catch up with a few of the students and speakers about their work in controlled environment agriculture. This week, we're sharing her conversation with Max Smith and Michael Blum in the university's teaching greenhouse. Michael is a second-year Biosystems Engineering Graduate student, studying plant lighting and quantum dot films. Max is a first-year graduate student in the Applied Biosciences program, doing research for their saltwater greenhouse project. Thank you for listening.
Hi everybody, welcome back to What Plants Crave. I'm Nadia Saba, your host. I am at the University of Arizona in the Controlled Environment Ag Center. I'm sitting here in the teaching greenhouse. For those of you who've never been here, it's a sawtooth greenhouse with polycarbonate walls and ceilings, and we have fans that are on. Some are on because it would be a little loud maybe if they were all on, but it's a nice cool day for Tucson. It's only about 65 degrees, but it reminds me being in here why we call the greenhouse effect because it does get warm in here without ventilation. Anyway, I am here with two guests, two students here who are master's students. I have Mike Blum and I have Max Smith, who are studying plants and greenhouses, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and what they're doing. So if you'd like to start, Mike.
Hi, my name is Michael Blum, and I am a second-year master's student in Biosystems Engineering here at the University of Arizona, and I'm studying plant lighting and quantum dot films.
Cool. How about you, Max?
Hi, my name is Max Smith. I'm a first-year graduate student in the Applied Biosciences master's program. Right now, I'm in a research greenhouse, part of the saltwater greenhouse project. We're using plant empowerment basically to help plants grow at a much elevated temperature and elevated humidity.
Oh, interesting. So how did you guys both get interested in controlled environment ag in the first place, and how did you find the center?
My story is kind of unusual one, I would say. I was down in Mexico, and we started an international school down there from nothing, but we were every day after school fundraising and trying to bring in money to build a school building and campus and all of these things. And one day we got funding for putting a aquaponics facility on our campus, and we got a donation for that. And you always say, I didn't know what aquaponics was at the time, but I'm like, yeah, let's do that. And we built a pretty decent size aquaponics facility on our school campus, and we integrated it. I was responsible for integrating it into our curriculum, and we integrated it into our biology, our chemistry, and our business classes. And
Wow.
our students operated it, and that's what first got me into controlled environment agriculture. And from there I tried to learn everything I could about controlled environment agriculture because I didn't know what I was really doing. So I looked about getting a master's, and I looked at all of the schools in the US, and when I was coming back here, it was like 15 years later, I came back and applied, and here I am.
Have you taken any of the lessons you've learned so far back to that school that you helped start and bring that aquaponics system to?
Yeah, so that was 10 years ago now that I was there, so it was a while ago, but I was learning from places like the CEAC when I was down there, and we were trying to make it all work because we didn't really know what we were doing, and we were learning at the same time as the students. So.
Very cool, very hands-on, it
Yeah.
sounds like. And what about you, Max? How did you find controlled environment ag?
So I was a bachelor's student at the University of Arizona, but I was actually studying human physiology. Backstory, like with my parents and everything, we were always like very interested in garden, had a home garden. My father was military, so we were stationed overseas for a while, and we lived in a small farm town in Germany. And from there, that was basically where we first got our like full sense of like large scale agriculture. The main farmer there, his name was Alfred. He grew all of his maize crops, and he used that to then feed his pigs and his cows for slaughter or for his cows for dairy. So I mean, our first times we didn't speak a lick of German, but we're sitting on the feeders, just sitting back, spraying all the honey pot that they cleaned out all their house with. It was basically just raw human seaweed. So this was produce not for human consumption, that's for sure. But it did okay for the pigs and cows.
Wow.
But, so as I started my journey, my dad was also medical, so I figured I'd just like follow in the family footsteps and go something in medicine. But basically 3-4 years in, I figured like I was not enjoying it. It was not for me. Did not really enjoy patient care. I had some opportunities where I was able to intern at the sports medicine facility. I was just like trying to switch it up a bit, but still it was just not my calling. So it was too late at that point to like switch anything. So I went ahead and finished like my bachelor's degree. After getting out of school, I actually found myself working and managing one of the local medicinal marijuana dispensaries here in town. And from there, that's where I started getting my first looks into like indoor green controlled environment systems, and actually basically controlling environments to make a lot of produce for profit. And from that experience, I actually saw how you could do things wrong, which was a more enticing experience, because I saw all this money being put into all the light systems, the amount of labor that was being put into it, and by the end of it, they're still putting out a subpar product. And that kind of got me into like, well, I mean, I want to be able to help this. I want to be able to do this. So I then made the decision to go back to school, and actually doing that, I left the dispensary. Currently now I'm working at a craft beer bar in town, and I can also see just the amount of need and the amount of demand for high quality produce year round. Because, I mean, hops, which are a big part of beer, they're only harvested freshly at a certain time of the year. But, I mean, one thing that we could do from there is just, like, especially using greenhouse, you could have it hop season all year round. So just kind of some interest in that led me to kind of the CEAC. I found my program, honestly, just doing Google searches to see what was offered. I wanted to see what it took to be a grower, and like some people followed the footsteps of how they did it, and I found this program. Luckily for me, it was a mile down the road from my house.
I was gonna say, how lucky.
Yeah, it was perfect. It was great. And so from there, I decided to take a couple classes, one of which was actually with Dr. Giacomelli. And from there, I asked him if he had any positions available, and now I find myself working underneath him as a researcher. So
wow, so you went from human and animal physiology to plant physiology, and I guess engineering a facility or empowering plants to be their best.
Yep.
And not just throw a whole bunch of money and technology without really having a rhyme or reason to it, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing. So tell us a little bit about the research you've done, Mike. What exactly are you studying?
Yeah, okay, so I'm working on a NASA-funded project using quantum dot films to change the color of light that the plants are receiving.
Okay, what is a quantum dot film?
Yeah, so a quantum dot is basically a special molecule that has a fluorescence effect. It absorbs at a higher wavelength and emits at a lower wavelength. So absorbing blue light and emitting red light. That's a quantum dot. And the quantum dot film, so if you embed a bunch of those quantum dots into a plastic film, you can keep them stable for a long time. And that's always been the trick with these kind of colored films or this kind of technology, is that they work, but they work for a really short time. They degrade quickly, but the ones that we're working with, they don't degrade very quickly. They convert the blue and the ultraviolet light into red or orange light.
So something actually usable by plants?
Yeah, and the red and orange light is the most photosynthetically efficient light for the plants too, so it increases their photosynthetic efficiency. And we've studied that on red romaine lettuce, and across the board we tried 6 different quantum dot films, so absorbs and emits at slightly different wavelengths of light, slightly more red, slightly more orange, and we saw improvements across the board on our lettuce.
On all of those films?
On all of the films, they were all 10 to 20% better
compared to
a normal polyethylene film.
Really?
In our red romaine lettuce trials, yeah.
So 10 to 20% improvement. Does that film cost 10 to 20% more?
No, it doesn't. And in it's competitive with polyethylene
Really?
film. It's used not exactly in the same way. The polyethylene film would be your traditional covering for your greenhouse, and these films currently are inserted underneath your film, inside your greenhouse.
So it'd be another layer
of film. And I know they're working on incorporating these into the glazings of the greenhouse, into the films, so you don't have that second layer. But currently, we have that second layer with these films.
Well, because you mentioned degradation, so it seems to me like one of the benefits would be to use that as your primary cover.
Yeah, and
Is there also an energy efficiency benefit to using these films? If you're not letting in higher wavelengths of light, maybe you don't need as much cooling or something?
there is that. It does shade. It blocks about like 10% of the light passing through it. So if you were in a really low light situation, these might not be the best choice. But for example, here in Tucson, we have to shade our greenhouses anyway. So it shades. It takes about 10% of the light, but it shifts the light into the red and orange, where it's more photosynthetically efficient, and it also makes the light more diffuse at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it can be thought of as kind of, at this moment, like an alternative to supplemental lighting.
Really?
The supplemental lighting will extend your growing time, right, and give you more for the light that you have, but at the cost of energy input. And so these, you won't get extra light, but you don't have to put any energy into these. So
it also sounds like it sort of breaks that rule of thumb that 1% more light means 1% more yield, but you just said the opposite, that 10% less light is 10% more yield.
Yeah, it's not so much that, so less light on its own is worse, but if the light that they're getting is light that they can use and use efficiently, as opposed to ultraviolet, which they don't really even use, and the blue, which they use but not as efficiently, you can make up for diminishment in incoming light with the color of light that you're giving them.
So, last question along this line of conversation: why is NASA interested in these films?
So NASA, even though these films could help farmers here, NASA is interested in these for specific applications to space. And in space, you have to have very efficient systems that can make the most of the light that you have. If you're on Mars or if you're on the moon, you have to make the most of the light you have. So that improved efficiency is really valuable to them. But also, it's much more lightweight than some kind of supplemental lighting system, and it's less energy intensive, obviously, which are both important things for space and for NASA. The other thing I would say is that space, because there's no atmosphere like there is here, is a much higher UV environment than it is here. And so these films that can absorb UV light and emit light in the far spectrum that the plants can use, that has an extra benefit to space applications, because you have all this extra UV light which isn't helping your plants grow.
So would those plants then be exposed directly to the incoming sunlight? Or I'm just thinking about being at the Mars Lunar Greenhouse and how we're using electrical supplemental lighting for those modules. Would this be a case where we would actually be exposed to direct sunlight? Or could we also see benefits of using that electric lighting with these films, do you think?
Yeah, so you could see both, potentially. This would allow you to use the natural light that you're getting more efficiently, which can help with that. Part of this project is also developing the technology to put these quantum dots into fiber optic cables.
Oh, wow.
So you might have solar collectors on the moon or Mars, which are collecting the natural light that's hitting them and sending them through fiber optic cables, and using these quantum dots embedded in those cables to get you more efficient use of the light that you're collecting. So that's also
super interesting.
Part of this project. So
very cool.
In terms of using them underneath electrical lights, you probably wouldn't do that. It doesn't make sense. unless you had lights that were giving out much higher UV and blue than was necessary.
Which generally we're sort
If you
of
had
avoiding,
LED,
right?
if you had some kind of targeted LEDs, you just would not have that extra light.
Right. Very cool. So Max, tell me about the research you're doing.
So right now I'm what's involved with a project called the Saltwater Greenhouse Project with in tandem with the University of California, Merced. And so our side of the research is we're testing elevated temperatures with elevated relative humidity to control the vapor pressure deficit.
Okay.
And we're doing that to show that we can still have successful plant growth with yields that are the same as control variables, that like just normal greenhouse conditions where we're running all the environmental control systems. And we're just making sure that we can have a quality product being grown under these conditions with elevated temperatures and elevated relative humidity.
Okay, so give me an example, because I'm just thinking, okay, we want to target, let's just say a VPD of 1 kilopascal.
Mhm.
And so maybe it's 80 degrees and 70% relative humidity would be like our ideal conditions, right, to grow tomatoes to hit that VPD. So when you say elevated temperature and elevated humidity, what does that mean exactly?
So right now we're heating during the daytime here in Arizona.
What?
Yes, we are.
No.
It is warm, but we need
Do you
to have
need
it
to?
warmer. For what the process they need to do for their desalination processes, yes.
What do you mean?
So on their side, they're trying to remediate their salty water that comes off of their field fertigation systems. So they're basically trying.
So we're integrating this with field agriculture?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And that is more their side of the project. We're just demonstrating that we can actually have successful plant growth at those temperatures and at those relative humidities.
What are those temperatures? I'm scared.
Right now we can get up to about 86 during the daytime, and our humidity can get upwards of 80%. It's roughly about between 75 to 80% at
Okay.
times. We're supplementing that with misters at the back of our greenhouse, and they're, depending on like during the day, they're just constantly running.
Where would that humidity come from? I mean, so you're simulating this high temperature, high humidity, and really targeting a vapor pressure deficit, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so in the desalination process, where's the heat coming from? Is the heat and the humidity coming from the same process?
I think not. Their desalinator is, I think, something that's proprietary, and we're not really disclosing at this time because it's going to basically be their own proprietary information.
Sure.
But from what we understand, it needs to be ran at these elevated temperatures and at these elevated relative humidities to work the most efficiently. So
What do you for the desalination process to work the most? Okay.
Exactly. So I'm not quite sure what the process is, if it's going for something by like evaporation, if it just needs to have more of that, or basically what the ins and out of there, but that's more so like what they're testing and like their own kind of sneaky secret sauce that they're developing.
So our listeners are screaming like, what? Like high temperature? Isn't that like the whole point of being in controlled environment ag, to like manage the temperature and humidity to like exactly what the plants want? I mean, explain. Are they doing well under these elevated
They
conditions?
actually are. They are doing very well. We're actually having successful growth. We're having yields that are basically on par with like normal controlled environment systems. We're having the same amount of growth. We're averaging, so in our greenhouse we have cucumbers, 2 varieties of tomatoes, and we're also growing melons. And then we'll soon be starting lettuce and deep water culture. Cucumbers, we were averaging, I think, probably like 50, 60 pounds a week of just raw cucumbers. And that's between, I think, 18 plants. So they're just pumping out cucumbers.
Wow.
On tomatoes, we were getting on average about a foot of apical growth a week as well. Harvests have been on par with recent or past control studies that we've been doing with it. So everything's been going great. It's been actually a fantastic environment, but part of what we're doing is that we're using the idea of plant empowerment to help control the environment. And so what we're doing for that is to calculate our vapor pressure deficit. Instead of using the normal ambient temperatures, we actually have an IR probe on leaves at all time, and that'll then relay data to make sure we're getting a correct vapor pressure deficit that's best and most suitable for the plant. So I think we're shooting around like 1.3, 1.5 kilopascals, and that's been
And that's based on leaf temperature,
Yes.
as opposed to air temperature.
Exactly, yeah.
How do they compare? I mean, at 86 degrees, is the leaf temperature higher or lower than the air temperature?
Well, the leaf temperature is always going to be lower because as it is transpiring, it's releasing that water vapor. It's basically like perspiring as we do. As we're sweating, the sweat evaporates, our body temperature gets lower. Same thing that's going on with the plant. So on natural, the plant is going to be relatively cooler than it's going to be actually in the ambient temperature. So if you have a higher ambient temperature, you're most likely going to be putting more water into the air than you need to, and that's not going to be doing the best for your transpiration of your actual plant. The stomatas are not going to open and close properly, and they may not transpire as much as they need to because there's more water vapor actually in the air.
I mean, that was kind of going to be my next question is, do you have to modify any of the other input variables like irrigation and nutrients to make up for this higher temperature and humidity, or because we're still controlling to a vapor pressure deficit, it's still about the same?
Exactly. So since we're controlling the vapor pressure deficit to an all right amount, where it's in that like basically the green zone, where we don't really need to change anything with irrigation or things of that nature, because we're kind of staying in that sweet spot for the vapor pressure deficit.
Now, I was always taught that tomatoes like an average daily temperature of around 22 degrees Celsius. I'm just going to pick a number. Do you have to lower the temperature at night to maintain that daily average temperature, or can we shift the whole average daily temperature up by having these higher temperatures and humidity? Is it really VPD?
Yeah, so what we're doing is it's more so the plant can't handle the heat at nighttime, so we're only using the heat trials during the day. If we had this heat going at night, we're not irrigating at night.
Okay.
So it just won't have the amount of water to be able to actually transpire as it needed to. But on days where it's cloudy, it doesn't work that well because we can't have all this heat and we can't have all this moisture in the air without the sun to actually help kickstart a lot of these like biological processes. So
So you're not shading then?
we're not shading. We actually have the only glass glazed greenhouse. So we're allowing basically everything in.
Wow. So you're really optimizing for light, PPFD, for temperature, which is really about vapor pressure deficit, and I guess whatever the CO2 is. I mean, it's still, you're not altering that. I'm
We're not
assuming.
supplementing CO2. Yeah.
Interesting. Very cool.
Yeah.
So tell me something you've learned. Something you guys have learned about growing plants in general. I know, Mike, you mentioned aquaponics and you were learning from the ground up. You started with animals or humans, I guess, and worked on this farm. What has surprised you both about growing plants in general and in a controlled environment?
It's complicated. I would say it's complicated and complex. Whether it's easy or hard depends on your skill
Your
level.
definition.
It's hard-
Or that.
It's hard when you're starting, for sure, to understand all of the different complex variables. And I think even as you learn more and more, it's still complex. It's still a lot of things are happening, and you're trying to control all the factors, and there's things that are outside of what you're trying to control for and that are affecting you. Just
The irrigation system, the fertigation, I think that's what that is, right? Yeah, the fertigation system just kicked on and sitting right behind us. We're in a living, breathing greenhouse growing all these tomatoes and peppers and eggplants. What are we going to do? The joy of working in a greenhouse.
One of the many sounds we get.
Yes, I love it.
Clicks and
It's good background.
whirs, everything. I was saying, like, even kind of building off what Michael was saying, it is a very steep learning curve. So me coming from just learning about how the body controls itself, you're basically now, like, you're controlling how the greenhouse is breathing. You're controlling its own temperature. You're controlling the nutrients that you're putting into it too. So it's a lot of just deeper understanding that you can have more with plant science, I would say. Because, I mean, anyone can just, like, get some seeds planted in the ground, water, and hope for the best. But to do it well and to do it on a level where you're going to get, like, adequate yield and in a very, like, in a most efficient way, that's where the learning curve kind of comes in, where you have to do a little bit more background, a little bit more research. You have to employ all these hundreds of thousand, multi-million-dollar systems, but it's for the purpose of trying to kind of make a lot of field agriculture obsolete in a ways. Because a lot of times where, like, even like leafy greens were grown in a field, we can do sometimes per square meter twice the amount, 200%, basically what we've been seeing from fields inside of a greenhouse, with less water usage, with less fertilizer, with other things like that. It's just, but you have to know how to do it correctly, that's for sure. Like, you can't just go into it willy-nilly just expecting you're gonna blow everything out of the water. Then, like, some of these people have been doing it for hundreds of years on their family farms. It's definitely something you got to control the environment.
We don't have as much historical knowledge in how to grow plants using hydroponics and controlled environment ag as we do the 10,000 years of farming that make us human.
One thing I would add is that something that surprised me, I guess, is thinking about the plant in our controlled environments. These are not the environments that they evolved to thrive in. We're altering that. We're changing that. In the natural world, they will see stresses, and they will see different events, different weather conditions that they're not seeing in our greenhouses, and they're evolved for a different environment than we're giving them. That's why paying attention to the plants is so important, I think, because it's not just about, okay, look, what temperature do they need, look that up, put that in there. It's paying attention to how they're responding to this environment as opposed to their natural environment, and thinking of those differences between our controlled environment and the world in which they evolved is, I think, really important, and that's really changed how I look at growing plants. And you have to speak their language, kind of.
Yes, it's not all about us, is it? It's about them, I think. So, I mean, just based on that line of thought, do you think there's actually advantages that plants have by being exposed to a variable environment? Like, even if you just think about your colleagues who are in the vertical farm research facility, do you think that they have more advantages by constantly creating a uniform environment that's consistent all the time for plants? Or do you think that maybe you have an advantage being in a greenhouse with more variable environment?
Yeah, and being outside has its own advantages for their level of variability. I know that in the world of tea plantations, the flavor of the tea depends on the various stressors that plant, that tree has lived through, that releases different enzymes and different chemicals for their defense to those stresses. And if you're ever taking stresses away, that's going to affect how they grow. You'll have some advantages. You might be taking away some other advantages as well at the same time.
Yeah, that's a great point. Even just thinking about Dr. Roberto Lopez's talk earlier about lighting, he was saying how for growing basil up to from 200 to 600 ppfd, that yes, they grew faster at a higher light intensity, and they also expressed more of these flavonoids and terpenoids, which seems great on the surface that it increased, but actually consumers like the flavor of basil down at 200 micromoles. So why are we pushing it to 600 if that's not what consumers want anyway?
True. Yeah.
I don't know.
I think a lot of it's even like looking like we're forcing plant growth, because as we use a lot of CO2 supplementation in a lot of our greenhouses and even large scale grows, it is growing a larger plant. You're getting more yield. But there's been like research showing that actually when you supplement too much CO2, or if you do it for too long in a plant, actually the nutritional aspects of the fruit will actually be decreased. So it's your give and take. Are you looking for a more quantity of fruit, or are you looking for a better quality of fruit? So you definitely do coddle the plant in certain ways. Like we control the environment, we make it so it's the best thing for the plant, but it is some of those stressors that, like Michael was saying, it gives the better flavor for the plants, it gives it more nutritional value, it makes it a lot hardier of a plant. It goes through these stressors, and from there it actually, if it goes through water stress early on in life, and then you get it back to normal water, it actually has a better ability to uptake water because it has better aquaporins in its root. It just different things like that. Like developmentally, the stressors can be very helpful to a plant.
It's interesting how. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was just gonna add on to that so controlling the environment is an advantage as long as you know what to control for. But so like if it might be that you need to introduce certain stressors, but that's where it gets complicated as to what should you be controlling for.
And when do you introduce those stressors?
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to introduce it all the time. I mean, going back to Dr. Lopez's talk, he talked about adding blue light, and that, you don't have to do it throughout the 2 or 3 week life cycle of the lettuce plant. You can just do it in the last week or the last few days, and it'll express those red and blue colors that you're looking for. Interesting. So what do you guys want to do? I mean, after you're done with this program, you guys want to stick around and do a PhD? Do you guys want to go out and build greenhouses or run a greenhouse? What do you guys want to do?
I guess it seems what I'm most limited to. I definitely do want to get out into the industry and start gaining some experience, like hands-on, more so than I'm already getting at the university level. But I guess, I mean, ideally I'd like to be in some sort of situation where I can apply my knowledge. I definitely don't want to like jump into sales. I don't want to sell greenhouses to people. I don't want to like sell a lot of basically the products that go into greenhouses. I want to be one of the ones on the front lines actually learning how to help improve them, or like the practices that you use for the greenhouses, or just something that you can use to increase the efficiency while minimizing the amount of resources that you're actually using.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I would like to jump into it, just making them more efficient than they already are. But where that is and who that's with, I am not quite sure yet.
Very cool.
And I would say that I'm still keeping my options open. I'm really interested in the space applications of my project, and working on further NASA studies or the applications of these kind of things in space is very interesting to me, and also in extreme environments here on Earth, because space is just a very extreme environment, but we also have extreme environments here on Earth where we can't really grow things, and so those technologies kind of is just about learning how you can create an environment for the plants that will allow you to grow things in a place that you otherwise wouldn't. That's where I'm really interested in. I am considering pursuing a PhD. I'm also considering going out and trying to build a company or build a project that looks towards these kind of goals.
Awesome. I mean, I think about Tucson and Arizona, and I mean, it's dry here, it's hot here, and I mean the rest of the world. I'm in California, and we're dealing with drought all the time. I mean, we're just in this mega drought that's never going to end, and we're going to be hurting. I mean, I just feel like this Arizona climate is just going to migrate north, and what you guys are doing here is going to help us in more northern latitudes. I'm not even that northern of a latitude, but you're helping us prepare for a future that feels inevitable right now.
I think this field is going to be in the spotlight here fairly soon, just for main agricultural practices. As global warming is increasing, and as desertification is making a lot more land that was once very fertile and very rich with like actual plant species is now just turning into dry desert. But I mean, here in Arizona, we're in the middle of this desert, and we have these lush greenhouses still able to produce pounds and pounds of produce per week. So I think there's going to be a demographic shift from these like larger scale, larger land mass, excuse my dyslexia, growing projects, and it's going to be more focused towards the greenhouse side. So I think we're kind of more on the forefront of it, especially if not here, and then like wherever we choose to travel, whether it be like space or, I mean, hopefully avoiding another like Dust Bowl situation. Then we can, man, we can't grow anything outside of it. At least we have our indoor spaces that we can control. So I think that's why I'm happy for this field, and I found a good spot because I feel like we're
part of the future.
Yeah, it's on the forefront of a lot of this new cutting edge technology that is going to be very, very important, I think, in the next 10, 15, 50 years.
Yeah.
I would say this planet we live on is kind of like a greenhouse. It's just that the controls are a lot more complicated and a lot larger scale, and we have to make it work. So learning about how to control plants and the effects of controlled environments on plants is gonna have something to say on the plants that are on Earth that are having their environments change. So
yeah. Awesome. Well, you guys, thank you so much for your time today. It was really fun getting to know you and learning about your research.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you very much.
That was Dr. Nadia Saba speaking with Michael Blum and Max Smith in the CEAC Teaching Greenhouse at the University of Arizona. Subscribe and listen every week for new interviews with growers and researchers in controlled environment agriculture. Thanks for listening.